if we were a drone and we could go way up in the air right now, we would look down, and so this is, maybe some of you can hold these up a little bit around places, but this is a topographical map of Jerusalem, okay? And so you can see there's a hill right down here, a low hill, and that's over there on the east side. And this is where the water source for Jerusalem is. And so that's why the oldest part of the city, called the City of David, is here. Now, that's called the Eastern Hill. This is the watershed ridge over here. The Mount of Olives is over there, and where Jerusalem is in between. There's two hills, the Eastern Hill and the Western Hill, and then three valleys. The Hinnom Valley, which is coming down here, and it's going to curl around. It's going to form the western and the southern border. The Kidron Valley is coming down on the other side. That's going to form the Eastern Valley. And then the Central Valley, or the Topography Valley, is coming down the middle, which is going to divide the two hills from the east to the west. Okay, so this is the Eastern Hill. So on that northern part of the Eastern Hill is the Temple Mount. You see it there? Mount Moriah. That's where the temple was. And then we're standing on the edge of the Western Hill, which is right here. It's higher than the Eastern Hill. It's bigger than the Eastern Hill. Now, when you dig here archaeologically, you get down to the Assyrian time period. You're just at Lachish, and you find a whole bunch of houses that are all smashed together. You ever seen, some of you have seen a refugee camp? That's what was on this hill, was a refugee camp. With all these houses smashed together, who were people from the north that came down here, and then Hezekiah built his wall around, and you can see one patch of his wall. You see this wall? If you walk over and look at that sign, it'll tell you this is the wall from that kingdom period. So whenever you're looking at walls, you see a whole bunch of different time periods represented. The major part of the city wall up there where you see the arrow slots, that's from 500 years ago. This tower that you see right here is Roman, from the time of Herod the Great. That little patch of wall is what's left over from Hezekiah, because when they rebuilt the walls in later times, they just built it on the same wall line. And that's the wall that the whole remnant of God's people is on the other side, left alone like a hut in a melon field, that God delivers and preserves his people, that later on in time the Messiah comes from in Jesus. Now you saw the topography. This here represents the city of David. This little slip, forget about this right now. That's the Canaanite city of Jebus, right, that David conquered on that lower part of the Eastern Hill. And then David's son, Solomon, built the temple and extended it further to the north onto the upper part of the Eastern Hill. Okay? And then at the time of Hezekiah, forget about this part now, up here, but then this wall from the city of David around the Western Hill for the first time to take in the refugees, you see that? Happened at the time of Hezekiah. That was destroyed by the Babylonians. When it was rebuilt by Nehemiah and Ezra and Zerubbabel, and then later the wall by Nehemiah, it was rebuilt like this. Then the Hasmoneans rebuilt it with the western wall back to where it was in the time of Hezekiah. And then at the end of that, Herod the Great did this extension that you see at the top. Okay, and this is the city, Herod's city. This tower right here is from that city. This is the city that Jesus was crucified and buried and rose from the dead outside of. So I marked where the tomb is. Here's the tomb outside of the city wall, and Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified. Everybody see it? So that's Herod's city. You see up here these 3 towers that guard Herod's palace? See those 3 squares of those 3 towers? That's one of them. Right there. Okay. Everybody understand? So, now we have to talk about this city. This is a very important city. There's 2 things that dominated Herod the Great's city. You guys have seen a lot of Herod the Great, right? Did he do things small scale or did he do things big scale? So there's 2 major things that dominate Herod's city. One is, here, let me put this down. One is the temple, which he enlarged and glorified, and the other is his palace. We're going to call it his palace complex. That's why I got a line around it. It's fortified. Okay, so inside of his palace complex, you see his palace complex? Right here is his palace, his actual palace building. There's a royal garden in there. It's all explained in detail by Josephus, who saw it personally. You all see it? And then there's a wall around his whole palace. This is the barracks where the soldiers are. If you're Herod the Great, right? And you have your palace right there. See this minaret behind the tree? Right there, he's got this his palace. Why would you put these 3 huge towers right where your palace is?
To look for enemies.
You're gonna protect yourself, aren't you? Then you're gonna put a wall that fortifies your palace complex from the rest of the Jewish city. What if the Jewish city rebels against you? What if they attack you? You're going to want a fortification wall around there. And then you got a royal garden, which Josephus says, he explains all about the royal garden, which is right about in here. And it's full of statues and statuettes of the Roman gods and goddesses. And then the barracks. You see the barracks in that fortified Herod the Great palace area. All this stuff has been excavated several times by different excavations. We know where the gardens were. We know where the barracks are. We know where the palace is. But when you have a historical reference to the palace, think about this. When you have a historical reference to the temple, like say in the gospel accounts, does it just mean the temple, only the temple building? Only the temple building? Doesn't it mean when they're talking about the temple, the whole Temple Mount area? The whole area of the temple? It's the same way when you read about the palace, it's talking not just about the palace, the actual building, the palace of Herod the Great. It's talking about the whole complex, the whole fortified complex. You understand? And that was on the other side of these towers in this wall. Okay, now, this is what was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. Okay, it laid in rubble from 70 AD until Hadrian came along and he built a totally different city. Not called Jerusalem. This isn't called Israel anymore. This isn't called Judah anymore. What did he call it, Hadrian? Palestine. He named it after the Philistines. And then the city is Aelia Capitolina. Do you see how different it is? Look how different it is from the Jewish city underneath it. You see that? Listen to this. In the Jewish city, what is the spiritual focus? The place of spiritual focus? The temple, all the way from Old Testament times, all the way into Second Temple period times. But not in this city, Aelia Capitolina. The focus, the spiritual focus moves. The whole city has changed. Something happened that changes the whole spiritual focus of not even Jerusalem anymore, Aelia Capitolina. Okay? And then the Romans were taken over by Christianity, and Constantine becomes the first emperor that's Christian. And so then that starts the Byzantine Jerusalem. This is Byzantine Jerusalem, which, by the way, looks a lot more like Aelia Capitolina in its design than it does Jerusalem. So when you're standing in Jerusalem, don't ever forget that you're standing on top of many, many layers. And each one of those layers represents a different city that's underneath your feet. And they're all stacked on top of each other like any tell that you're walking around on. Jerusalem is a tell. And it's made up of different layers of different cities. Okay, now I really want you to get this. So, look. Right here is the Church of the Holy Sepulcher today. Okay. Everybody see it? Now watch. We're going to go under this layer to the next layer. That's the temple of Jupiter and Venus. You see it? Next layer underneath. Okay, now let's peel that archaeologically away. That's the tomb and crucifixion place of Jesus. You understand? One thing on top of another. When this city that I'm pointing to now was destroyed, its main holy place, Hadrian looked at all the rubble and he said, I'm going to put a temple. We would kind of expect him to put it on the Temple Mount. He didn't. He put it somewhere else. And then he built his entire city around it. You see this? This whole street coming down here is called the Cardo Maximus. This is the main street, the Roman main street, from north to south. Why did he put the main street right there? Because he put his main temple right there. You see this big area below it? That's the Forum. That's the main shopping area where you get water and where you have shopping. Where is it? It's right next to the main temple. Where is that next to? The main street, where he lays out the main street. And then, how did they know? How do we know in this city where the tomb of Jesus is, where the crucifixion place is? You go into the temple. In the temple that Hadrian built, there's Jupiter over the top of the tomb where Jesus was raised from the dead, and there's the statue of Venus over the place where Jesus was crucified. Do you see it? Desecration. Oh my gosh. If you would read in the Roman histories about what they did in worshiping Venus, the goddess of love. Talk about baby bones. I excavated a child sacrifice. And so I took that infant bone to the hospital here to have the tests run on the bones. And when I got there, I gave it to the lady who was doing the DNA testing, and she was looking at the bones and she was studying them, and she opened a drawer full of bones, baby bones. And she starts pulling these out and starts looking at this one compared to this one and that one compared to that one. And I was like, what the heck are those? She opens up drawer after drawer after drawer of hundreds of babies that were found in Ashkelon at the Temple of Venus. And what they believe is that these were the temple prostitutes when they would get pregnant, and then they would have their baby, and then they would discard them in a certain place, and that's where they believe these babies went from. Do you understand? This is the same kind of thing we're dealing with in Gezer that is going on over the top of the place where Jesus died for us. Maybe if we start to understand that a little better, we can understand God's wrath a little better, and we can understand God's grace better. This desecration happened. They knew where to come. Constantine said, destroy this abomination, get rid of it, and build over the top a church that commemorates these places as they should be commemorated. Okay? What they look like today is totally different. You got to think of all those layers that go back and back and back. Okay, now, the main thing that we got to get for this site that we're at right now is this. this temple complex, or this palace complex right here on the other side of this wall. Okay? And you can see there's a gate. See that? There's a gate leading outside of the palace complex of Herod the Great. Why would you want, if that's your palace complex and you're Herod the Great, why would you want a gate that led out of your palace complex to the outside of the city? If the Jews get mad at you, you're going to want to come out. You know what's right over there is the Herodium where you were at. You're going to make a run for the Herodium. That was his plan. I'll make a run for the Herodium. Do you understand that where my two fingers are, this is the Roman stronghold for the city, and this is the Jewish place for the city. See it? Roman, Jewish. How many Roman soldiers do you think are walking around in this place over here? Not very many. How many Jews do you think are walking around in this place over here? Not many, right? Okay, and that's what we have to understand. We know there is one gate that leads out of this complex. You know how we know? Archaeology. Because they excavated this entire wall all along here. In fact, when they were excavating along here, there was a tree that was on top of this mound of dirt that you see over here that the governor of Jerusalem at the time said, don't destroy that tree, leave that tree. So you can see where the dirt line was that came here, and it came back over our heads all the way back over the top here, and they spent years in the 1970s, early 1970s and into the later 1870s, and they excavated this entire side of this. All that pottery that I've been reading, they never published this dig, and all this pottery from all of this wall is in an abandoned building on the other side here, and we go through it. There's like a handful of us, 4 or 5 people, one bag at a time, we pour out, and then we have to separate that pottery out. And then, of course, my teacher comes along and tells us the mistakes that we made because we don't read pottery perfectly. And he probably doesn't either. But they dug this whole side. My professor is responsible to publish this now because the main guy, Broshi, who was in charge then, he got passed the baton down to Shimon, who was a staff member on this dig, even though he was a teenager at the time. And so, how do we know that there's one gate that leads out of the complex? We know it because the entire western wall has been dug, and there's only one gate. Okay, now, so I'm going to read Philo. Does anybody know who Philo is? Yeah, Philo, he lived 25 BC to about 50 AD, so he's contemporary with all of this. Listen to what he says, Philo. Pilate was the emperor's lieutenant, having been appointed governor of Judea. So he's telling us about Pilate as being the governor of Judea. And listen to this. He, that is Pilate, dedicated some gilt shields in the palace of Herod in the holy city. So we have a historical source, Philo, that connects Herod the Great's city, Herod the Great's palace complex, is also used by Pilate years after Herod the Great, when Pilate is the governor here. Hey, if you're Pilate and you're coming up to stay in Jerusalem because Passover is going on, where are you going to stay? You going to stay in a little palace down here or over there? You're going to stay in the palace, the Roman stronghold. Same thing in Caesarea where you were. The palace there was built by Herod the Great, but then when later, when Pontius Pilate becomes governor of Judea, then he makes his residency in Herod the Great's palace. He did the same thing when he was up here at Jerusalem. Everybody agrees, it's obvious in Scripture that when the trial of Jesus happens, it takes place at this palace. This palace complex of Herod the Great. If you're talking about another palace in Jerusalem, like Josephus, for example, then he explains, he gives a detail that so you know what palace he's talking about. the Hasmonean palace, Agrippa's palace. But when he's talking about the Roman stronghold, he just says the palace, as it also says in the Gospels. Also, another great key, of course, Josephus tells us all about this stuff. We know all about it from Josephus. But here's another key from Luke 23:26. It says, as the soldiers led him away, they seized Simon from Cyrene, who was on his way in from the open country, and put the cross on him and made him carry it. So wherever the trial took place, Simon of Cyrene had to be able to come in from the open country. Look back at this palace complex. Do you see where he had to be? If he's coming in from the open country, he can't be in the city of Jerusalem coming up to where Jesus is being tried. He has to be in the open country coming into Jerusalem where Jesus is being tried. You see that? These are the reasons why this place, not the place that all the Christians go. All the Christians go down the Via Dolorosa to all these things. That's just the Crusaders. The Crusaders just made all that stuff up. So that's where everybody's walking down looking at everything. But scholarship didn't mess this up that I'm talking about. Christian tradition messed this up. But scholarship knows this is the place of the trial of Jesus. So we're going to go over. I'll show you this gate. And I'll show you the stone pavement. It's all been excavated. They knew when they excavated that they would find a gate. They didn't know where. They didn't know maybe there's more than one gate. But they knew they would find a gate. You know how they knew they would find a gate before they ever dug? Gospel of John. Gospel of John told them what was under the ground and what they were going to find before they found it. Okay, let's go look at it. Excavated. They came down to, do you see this? This is one side of the gate. This is the other side of the gate. We're walking in. You can follow me. We're walking in. Oh, here's steps. Steps that they found. Do you see the steps? And then look at this. As you come up here, the steps that went actually into the city are right here. They're preserved. The rest of them are destroyed, but they're preserved in the bedrock. You see that? This patch right here is a patch of Herodian stones. Do you see the Herodian stones? This is a little patch that preserves the wall at the time of Herod the Great. And then this preserves the steps of this gate that we're entering into as it went into that palace complex that I was showing you. So if there was a coup, Herod the Great, and if he was losing control, him and his Roman soldiers were going to run out this gate and run to the Herodian. Okay, now, help you understand it. Personally, I don't think it's completely accurate, and I'll explain why. It's just common sense. I've had this argument with them a zillion times, and I'm not saying I'm smarter than my professor at all, but it doesn't make, there's parts of it that don't make any sense. Okay, so this is the palace complex back here. Here's the gate part that you see right behind us there. You see that? Okay, then you come up, and then he's got this wall right here. So that wall you can see is coming in right, I'll point to it. It's right here. It comes in and you can see the base and it connects to right here. You see that? That comes in and connects right there. You got towers on either side, that makes sense. And then you got the stone pavement. And here's the problem with archaeology, is archaeology also destroys things in itself. It's self-destructive. So somebody was asking, well, where are the collapsed bricks at Jericho yesterday? Well, they're gone. They got dug out, right? Except where we were trying to look. It's the same way with the stone pavement, because look right here. You see stone pavement right here. So there was stone pavement at the time of excavation. There was stone pavement here. And then do you see these stairs going up right here? That's right up through there. They found stairs. And then at the top of the stairs, stone pavement. Now, why did they rip out all the stone pavement? because that's what you do in archaeology. Because when you find a floor, what you do is you rip it out and you look for coins, especially underneath the floor, that will give you a date of when that floor was made. And that's exactly what they did. But look, you can see a little bit of the stone pavement right here preserved where it originally was. You see these stone pavements? See them? So this level is the level when it was excavated that went out, that was completely covered with these stone pavements, stairs up to stone pavements. Understand? Okay. So come, then we climb the stairs. Take a good look at this stone as you're going up. We're going to go up here, but take a good look at this stone. Look at it. See how it's carved? That's not just an insignificant stone. You see that that's an important stone? Look at that stone. Walk up the stairs that are no longer here. The stone's up to this upper stone pavement. The thing I disagree with Shimon about is he has this wall coming up like this, but that doesn't make any sense according to the account. The wall would have been low so that you could see out this way. Come up here. So this was all covered in stone pavement. You can kind of see a bit of the remnant of the stone pavement where I'm walking right here. And then what's really important is we have this, that's part of the excavation. This is what's called in Hebrew a Bheema, and from the Greek a Bheema, which means, anyone? Judgment seat. Okay, come on up here, everybody, because this is very, very important. We have a gate. We have a stone pavement. On the stone pavement, we have a Bheema, a judgment seat. See that stone right there? Okay, take that stone and put it next to this Bheema. Remember, you've seen a Bheema before. You've seen a judgment seat before. Do you remember when you were at Dan? Do you remember the judgment seat there? Do you remember where the king sat? Do you remember those stones that looked like that one that were next to it? Where there was some kind of a canopy up here? I don't know why you would want to put a canopy over the top of you in this country. I'm not sure. Do you see what we have here? We have the same thing from a different period. That's from the kingdom period. That's from the Iron Age period. This is from the Roman period, from the time of Herod the Great. But oh my gosh, we have the stone pavement here, and we have the judgment seat. Holy smokes! Now, well, all we got to do, now that we have the context, everybody understand? Any questions? Because now all we got to do is read the account. Bill, you got those glasses? Where's Bill? And let's start in chapter 18, verse 28. Okay, it says, then the Jews had led Jesus from Caiaphas. We know where Caiaphas is too, but we're not going to see that. But anyways, Caiaphas is right around the corner, his place. So then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the palace. Do you see that? The palace of the Roman governor. You can look in your ESV study Bible. You can look in your NIV Archaeology Bible. Where will it place that? The palace of the Roman governor? Here. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not want to enter the palace. Right? Meaning the palace complex. They didn't want to go in there where all these statues and statuettes are set up. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out to them and asked, what charges are you bringing against this man? Okay, so you can see Pilate came out of that gate from his palace complex, past his barracks. He came up here on the stone pavement, Either he stood here or he went up onto his seat there. Here's where the crowd of the Jews were, out here. And he asked them, what charges are you bringing? So they go into whether he, what their charge is against him. Pilate says, take him and judge him yourself. But we have no right to execute anyone, the Jews object. Then it says in verse 33, Pilate went back inside the palace complex, right, the palace, summoned Jesus and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? Is that your idea, Jesus asked, or did others talk to you about me? Am I a Jew? Pilate replied. It was your people and your chief priests who handed you over to me. What is it you have done? Jesus said, my kingdom is not of this world. And boy, that is a key. That's what I argue all the time with archaeologists. Why have you seen so much archaeological remains from Herod the Great and so little archaeological remains from Jesus? This statement is the reason. My kingdom is not of this world. You want me to show you Herodian stones? I can show them to you all over this country. You want me to show you the stones of Jesus' kingdom? Every single one of you are one of them. And they're all over this world. Because his kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews, but now my kingdom is from another place. You are a king then, said Pilate. Jesus answered, you are right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me. What is truth? Pilate asked. With this he went out again to the Jews and said, I find no basis for a charge against him. But it is your custom. Then he goes into the whole thing with Barabbas. And chapter 19, verse 1, then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. So he had him flogged inside here. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, Hail, King of the Jews! And they struck him in the face. Once more, Pilate came out and said to the Jews, Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns, can you imagine this? Imagine this. Jesus comes out of that gate right there and is presented to the crowd right here. When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, Here is your man. As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, Crucify! Crucify! But Pilate answered, You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him. The Jews insisted, We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God, which definitely was a blasphemy, unless it was true. When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. Where do you come from? He asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. His two questions, are you a king? And where do you come from? Do you refuse to speak to me? Pilate said. Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you? Jesus answered, You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin. From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jews kept shouting, If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar. When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out. And he sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the stone pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. It was the day of preparation of Passover week, about the 6th hour. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. Listen to this. "We have no king but Caesar." Do you remember the temple that Herod the Great built to Caesar Augustus as a god at Samaria that we saw? There was also a temple like this built to Tiberius, the Caesar at this time, as a god. What do they say in the crucifixion? "We have no king but Caesar, who is not a descendant of Abraham, who is not from Jacob, who is not from Judah, who is not from the family of David. Jesus, who was born in Bethlehem, who is from the descent of all those people, is rejected, and the allegiance is pledged to the Gentile king of the Roman government." Is there any greater slap in the face? They shouted, take him away, crucify him. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to be crucified. These are the kinds of things. You can see I'm a tortured person, right? Think about what happened here. And yet the Christians are walking down the Via Dolorosa, which was created by the Crusaders in the medieval period. Hardly anyone comes here. It's one of those things that's understood in scholarship, but that Christian tradition has messed up so that people are going over there instead of coming here.
Why did the Crusaders make it over there?
Because they didn't know what they were doing. They came in here, they killed the people in the city. They knew where to start, Mount of Olives. They knew where to end. They knew where the Church of the Holy Sepulcher was, but they didn't know in between, so they just made up a route, and they made the stations where this happened and where that happened all along that way. And this place here, that's the authentic place where Jesus was tried, was neglected and is neglected to this day. So they're walking down the Via Dolorosa. The evangelicals are over at the Garden Tomb. It's a mess any way you look at it. But this is the place that the trial of Jesus happened. This is the judgment seat where the judgment that we all deserve was pronounced over Jesus instead of us. And then he was taken from here. We know where he was crucified. We'll go there next. How exactly they went to that place, we don't really know. Did they go around to the back? They didn't go through that gate. It makes sense to me, but who knows? That we're on the outside of the city right here where he was turned over to be crucified, and where he was crucified was outside the city. Makes the most sense to me that they would have just gone outside. Simon of Cyrene was coming in from the open country at some place in here, not exactly sure where, but he was coming in from the open country and was forced to carry his cross. And so as we walk now from here to the place of crucifixion, since we use the bathroom down there, it's a good context for us to know how far it was that Jesus carried his cross. We know because it's from here to where he was crucified. So we can walk now to the Church of the Holy Sepulcher and get that context.